thank you very much for being with us here at Fantasy Bookstore. We realized the lightning earlier on was a little bit frightening, so we appreciate you braving your way through that. And before we begin, I'd just like to give quick thanks to the people here the kind of VIPs who managed to make this happen, including Lili Yan, Shu, who are from the Chinese, the council section of the Chinese embassy, and James, of course, for supporting us as always, and as well as Li Hai Shu. Thank you so much for your support in terms of getting the word out. And we also like to thank Basti Bookstore for offering us their beautiful venue here today, because without that, it's such an incredible space, right? Moreover, we're very, very grateful for the support of an invisible partner in the room, which is Art Council England, whose funding has largely made tonight possible. And after the event, you'll see a couple of QR codes dotted around the back of the seats, dotted around. After the event, we'd be very, very grateful if you could scan that QR code and answer a few simple questions from Arts Council's Grampian platform. It basically helps them make their case in front of central government for the case of more culture, basically. So if you'd like to see more events like this, definitely answer those questions. That would be very, very helpful to us. And we also like to thank another partner we like to thank is the Chinese Literature Readers Club, who the global project to promote Chinese literature around the world. And it's actually founded by our the author in question today, Tie Ning. When she launched the project in 2022, she said, reading and appreciating exchange of ideas about literature from a country will help break through ignorance, isolation, and prejudice, and allow people to spiritually get close to and understand the rich emotional world of the people and their vibrant lives, which I think very much is the spirit of this book. And finally, we'd like to thank both our guests today, both Annelise Finegan and Paul French, to give you a quick introduction about them. Annelise Finegan is an English translator of the My Sister's Red Shirt and an academic director of the Translation and Interpreting at New York University School of Professional Studies. Her translation of Hans's Love in the New Millennium was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2019. And Paul French is a British author and commentator and an analyst on China, primarily focused on China in the first half of the 20th century. And he's known for books such as Midnight in Peking and A City of Devils, A Shanghai War. Thank you for joining us tonight. You just missed the big VIP section, but I think enough from me. I think I'll like to hand off to Paul for the rest of the events. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so I'm talking into this microphone, but we've got to kind of aim it towards this microphone. So there. Also, what Daniel didn't mention in his rapid fire mentioning of many things there was that as it's August, we're in Women in Translation Month, which is now an official thing that's kind of been gathering pace over the last few years. And this is a great event because we're talking about a woman in translation and we're talking about a woman who translates. So we're kind of really hitting the nail on that one. So that's quite important. If you are doing anything on this, please hashtag Women in Translation, as it's a kind of a growing kind of thing with events and books and so on. So Annelise, welcome to London.
Thank you, Bob.
I know you just arrived this morning, so and then you're off to Edinburgh afterwards.
Not sure what language I'm in, but I'll do my best.
You're kind of pushing away at it. It's great. Welcome to Battersea Power Station. It's not the usual.
It's lovely.
Well, okay then. How would you? Could you tell us how? I mean, you translate a number of writers. You have done over the years. Could you tell us how? Maybe synopsize this book a little bit, and maybe tell us how it came to you.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do so. This is really special, not only because it's by a woman author from China, but because it's 40 years after its original publication. So it has this wonderful life and history and even a nostalgia value to people for whom it was important as they were coming of age. It is a coming of age book. It's a story about two sisters who care for each other passionately and persistently, in a way, because coming up during the Cultural Revolution, they weren't necessarily parented by their parents, so they parent each other in a way. And so they have possessive love, but they're also keeping secrets from each other. And the older sister gives the younger sister this brilliant red seersucker vibrant shirt that starts to draw attention for being just a little too much, just a little too individual, and starts to have starts to be critiqued by teachers, by authority figures, and the younger sister already tends to be very critical of authority. So in the end, it's a very sweet story about the extent to which we try to protect those we care about so that they can express themselves. It's really lovely in the writing and also lovely in the execution. Before we go any further, I do have to point out what a wonderful job Sinowis Books has done with the book. If you open the front flap, there is a secret on the inside cover.
Which you have to buy it to do that. I'm not going to. And how did this end up coming to you through Sinoist, or had you had a relationship with Tie Ning's work before, or how did it happen?
Very organically, for Pathlight magazine, I had translated an excerpt from Midway Men, so The Rose Gate, a novel by Tie Ning, a number of years ago. And so Ying Matheson and Daniel Yang came to me and said, would you be interested in this project? And the marvelous thing was it received funding to be translated from English Pen, which we're very, very grateful for. And with it being Women in Translation Month, given the option, I always try to translate women, so that was very meaningful as well.
With everything that's available to translate, both historically and everything that keeps on coming out, short stories, novellas like this, big fat novels, non-fiction. And this is a book that first came out in 1984 in China. I mean, why now in English? What is the resonance that keeps this being a novel that we feel we should read?
I think it has extraordinary cultural currency today for English readerships who are increasingly challenged around issues of free expression. I think it also has a tremendous ability to diversify what we think of when we think of narratives coming from China. And I think that it is just on its own merits a really it's a sweet family story in a way, but it also has a lot of literary heft and literary satire that makes it worthwhile just on that level as well.
I sort of feel like for a while in the 1980s there wasn't a great deal that was being translated. Just the classics got another sort of do-over, and then when we got into the 90s and the aughts, there was this kind of flurry of translations, which were often big novels, Gao Xinjiang, people like that. But there was also a sort of mixed bag of books that were published that always had to have the kind of banned in China stamp on them, right? That was the kind of thing that got them published, and sort of was an appeal. And now I feel we're kind of getting into almost kind of looking back at the back catalogue, right, and thinking like, what were the greatest hits that we kind of missed back then? I know Michael Berry has been translating a lot of Fang Fang's earlier work, right, after the success of her COVID diaries and so on in the West, and that's been kind of interesting. I mean, is Tie Ning in that category that we need to sort of go back and in order to understand, post-cultural revolution Chinese literature, that these have to be translated now?
I think so, and I think it would be, if anything, a Loved in China sort of book. And I think that it's important to translate those too. And she has this extraordinary body of work that's worth bringing into English as well, that speaks really profoundly to women's issues.
I mean, there's also, God forbid, people that don't remember the 1980s as well. They're around, I've heard. And, this book does, even though it's incredible, it's a novella, it's between a short story and a novella, really. And yet it gives us an incredible insight into that period of the 1980s, sort of the end of the Cultural Revolution, but then that period that comes at, 1986 with the student rebellions that happened then, and of course, culminated in 1989. It is that real window on that early reform and opening up thing, and she's really great at doing that. That's when you see her really doing her literary chops, as we might say, right? That there's just these little seeds that are thrown in there that give us a great indication between the two sisters and the generational difference in how they approach the world.
It is so insightful on a human level and on a writerly level. The way that she depicts the generation between the sister who came of age during the Cultural Revolution, the sister who's coming of age in the early opening of the Reform period, the precision, the fact that she's doing this in the moment, and I think she was 24 at the time, is just remarkable to me. And there's a real eye for detail, whether it be brand names, whether it be things that are happening in the news that are making this story current. But I don't think those tie this book down to being of its time or necessarily to a reader who was around for the 80s.
No, not at all. But it does give us a sense of what people were sort of experiencing. You know, I mean, she throws in lots of things that were being translated around that time. You know, at one point she says her favorite book is Somerset Maugham's Moon and a Sixpence. I mean, that's not a traditional sort of book that was translated regularly. And she sort of says that, as well as things, references that obviously for a British audience, throwing in references to the fact that the Falklands War is on at the time and everything, you know, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I agree, certainly. And there are little moments like when she's practicing tango in her room, trying to stay very culturally current. The older sister is a poetry editor and herself an author of poetry. So she is very much trying to keep up with a global and a globalizing culture. And there's a lot of fun in sort of the middle sections of the book where she's editing poetry, some of it of very variable quality, and that lets her sort of also exercise this type of cultural knowledge.
Yeah, Anjing, the older sister, who's a kind of she's an interesting character in that she's old enough to have been a sent down youth towards the end of the Cultural Revolution, yet she is now working at a literary journal. Well, in the 1980s, literary journals were just everywhere in China, right? I mean, they just cropped up all over the country, popping up everywhere, publishing all sorts of things. So putting her in a literary journal is a very interesting one, and lots of references there to that kind of flowering of culture. I mean, at one point she makes a kind of very witty remark, and I have to ask you from a translation point of view how you get around this, where she sort of says, well, I've got this poem that I really, really want everybody to read, and we're going to publish it in our journal. It's not clear if anyone's reading this journal, because I think that was the problem with all the literary journals. It's like, who's reading them, right? But they're being subsidized, so they're out there. And she publishes it. And she wants to publish this because she thinks this is so much better than the misty poets, right? Who were the sort of immediately after the Cultural Revolution, those misty poets who had kind of a lot to say, but then there was sort of backlash against them. And she's doing this. But when we read the poem that she wants to publish, I mean, is it just me, or is it's fairly awful, right? I mean, it's pretty dreadful poetry, and
Yeah,
you have to
just
translate. So
poem,
I'm interested in that, about, you know, what, you know, situating her in a literary journal that is publishing not very good poetry, and she's championing it, and the sort of fights between different movements within poetry and literature in China. But also, how do you translate that so that we understand that it's bad?
Well, I think that's a really brilliant observation, Paul, about how Tie Ning is situating the older sister Anjing within these competing currents of literary cultures, from the very obscure to what she sees as a sort of revival or pushing forward of a very collectivist and nationalistic, frankly, vision. And she decides to go ahead with that poem, even though she doesn't really agree with the literary merits. With translating that, I tried to make it thud as much as possible. And then during copy editing, when the copy editor very kindly was like, "This doesn't scan very well," I was like, "Yes, that's okay. That's okay in this instance. We're not trying to." And it's really wonderful in the book that the older sister is trying to publish this poem in a way to curry favor with her younger sister's teacher, to try and have the teacher back off on her criticism of her younger sister. And so there's this manipulative element that's sort of layered over the literary critical debate that I find very interesting too.
Yeah, I thought that bit was great. And then the younger sister, sorry, it's gone out of my head now what her name is. Anran. You know, she's an interesting window into that period, because there's lots of little as I say, seeds that sort of tell us what the 80s education system was like. For instance, I mean, I remember well from when I went as a student in the 1980s of everybody skipping because they thought this would make them taller. And I used to get roped in, sorry about the pun, I used to get roped into this all the time because, of course, I'm very tall, right? So, did you used to skip a lot? And I'd be like, no, I was never a great skipper. It just kind of happened. And the other one, of course, the eye exercises at school in the class, which used to be able to by the child. Everyone would do the kind of eye exercises to try and combat myopia and so on. So we get that on one side, and then on the other side, we get a little insight into what she's reading, what she's thinking about, what she's listening to, what she's excited about, and this sense that the world is opening up much more in a way that Anjing, in a kind of literary debate, doesn't quite understand how the world is opening up in more general sense.
I think that's absolutely true. And there, in terms of the skipping, the eye exercises, there's this really heartbreaking part about how the older sister has saved up all her money and bought chestnuts for her younger sister because she thinks it'll make her hair more luxurious and darker and more vibrant. Um, so it's really very touching, and in a way, the world of the younger sister is the bigger world, and the older sister. It's almost tragic that the older sister can't see this in a way, and because of the way that she was criticized for being confused intellectually, ideologically as well, when she was her younger sister's age. Um, so I think that it's really nuanced and sensitive, and then I think as well, um, without wanting to give anything away, it does build to a real breaking point eventually, where the older sister just doesn't know what to do with this erupting and evolving world that her younger sister is in. And in a way, the author even admits, like, maybe I don't know what to do with all of this opening.
Yeah, the the literary journal thing, the time at school, all of that is sort of funny and funny. I mean, kind of laugh out loud funny. And I imagine if you grew up in China in the 1980s, it's seriously sort of quite amusing. But it's satirical, right? It's satire. And I don't know 80s, that period of opening up 80s writing, whether or not satire was really original at that time, or something lots of people were trying to do.
I think I think there was, but I think it's interesting. This novella was made into a film, and the film I think doesn't have the satire element to it.
Okay.
I think the film is very straight in the emotion. It's
Yeah, I want to come to the film, but there's also a lot of references in there. I mean, I'm a reasonably well-read guy, right? But there's a lot of references in there that were quite obscure, like that German aesthete philosopher. I mean, I'm not sure how to say it. Laocoon. I mean, is this? I had no idea what that was. I mean, that was me. I had to resort to Google that, so I don't know what I would have done in the 1980s. But
yeah, for me it was the football player. I couldn't get that at all.
that's the easy one.
So yes, there were the edition that I translated from actually had some updated footnotes for today's student readers, which I thought was pretty fun, pretty cool to work with. And sometimes novelistic detail I think is just detail. It's textural, but it doesn't. For those for whom it evokes something, it's evocative, but it's also okay just to have it as
Just absorb
specific.
it. Yes. So much Chinese contemporary fiction is about generations. Generations not understanding each other, not talking, having very, very different life experiences, in such an accelerated way compared even to, to the West. The traumas of the West, the traumas of China are so much more. I mean, this is interesting though, in that the parents, Anjing and Anran's parents, are not typical of the sort of parents that pop up in Chinese contemporary fiction all the time from that period.
I think this might be an interesting moment to introduce something we haven't talked about so far, which is that this novella is generally considered to be semi-autobiographical.
Right.
So I think in the parents there is some authentic relationship going on there. The father is obviously a way of, not obviously, but it seems to be Tie Ning working through these art for life's sake versus art for art's sake, and whether or not he can continue to have a painterly practice that is non-representational and non-political. And then the portrait of the mother, which is really at moments quite savage, but the portrait of the mother as someone who has been quite damaged by challenging life experiences. But as the novella goes on, you come to have more sympathy for what she's been through, and why she treats the daughters the way she does because of that.
I mean, one of the other issues in it, which you raised when we were talking about it before, is, it's also a novel about how people compromise and how people just kind of conform in order to protect yourself, protect your family, and just get on with the business of life and everything. And I think that's something that I assume readers did identify with at the time and would do now still.
I would certainly hope so, and what I take away from the novel the most is the way that the older sister is trying to protect the younger sister from having to conform, even if that's only temporary. And then it turns out in a sort of spin toward the end that the younger sister also protects the older one, that it's reciprocal between the two of them.
Yeah. So let's talk about the longevity of the book a little bit. It comes out in 1984. I mean, it's instantly a bestseller, or it's a slow burn. How does it work?
I think it's pretty instant, pretty much right away. This resonated. Since the translation has come out, I've heard from people who read it at the time and just have this incredibly strong connection to the narrative.
Yeah, so it's a bestseller across the country. It gets good reviews. It doesn't get criticized at all.
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. And then when did they made a film, which I haven't seen. Have you seen the film?
I have seen the film. They made the film, I think, just a couple of years later. I think only 2 years later. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's your kind of Siskel and Ebert? How many stars? Just a quick review.
I think the film was really quite lovely. The acting is very strong, and I tend to be very critical of child actors. The acting was very strong from the younger sister in particular, but it is more sincere and less satirical. It's more. I know there's a lot of fighting in the book, in the family, the domestic squabbles, but there's more just they're just fighting, and you don't get quite as nuanced a sense of the way that every member of the four-person household is trying to calm each other down at the same time as they're having a fight with each other.
Yeah, because I mean, in a sense, it's sort of, I wouldn't use the term soap opera, but it is at points what we in Britain in filmmaking anyway would call kitchen sink, right? It's kitchen sink. It's story. It all happens within sort of the household. It's discussions between people, rows or getting on again with people because you have to. And the film, I guess, that's a natural for a dramatic film.
It is. It sticks within those spaces. It makes more of the schoolroom scenes than we see in the novella. And there's a pivotal part where the older sister reads the younger sister's diary, and obviously that's not as easy to recreate in a film. The film picks up on a couple of images from the novella. One is the idea of eyes on the trees, the knots on the trees being eyes, and that's returned to quite a few times visually, so the sense of being watched. And the other is an image of the younger sister Anran in the classroom trying to absorb the criticism of her teacher and fellow students by holding onto her pencil case so hard so she doesn't cry. And that is something that's really just a passing line in the book, but quite a strong visual representation in the film.
And then, I mean, this has continued to be a popular book. I mean, obviously, Tie Ning has continued to write. She's continued to be a public figure, but this has continued to be a popular book.
Yes, this continues to be read by students today.
On the syllabus?
Yes.
Yeah. So people are still reading the book. They're still relating to the book. And do you know what their reaction? Do you know how another generation reacts to it?
I should research research that more. It's a really good question to see. When I was translating, I was thinking about translation as time travel and trying to be very authentic to the early and mid 80s. Like even looking up, for example, like there's some insults in the book and looking up like did people say that in English in the early mid 80s.
Yeah.
So let me get back to you on that one about contemporary response.
And then, you know, nowadays you could almost read it as nostalgic with your red bean ice cream and the peanuts that they're buying and everything.
Extra.
Yeah, quite simple pleasures. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit before we have some questions, obviously, about Tie Ning, the author herself, as Woman in Translation Month. She's kind of an interesting writer in that she has changed genre and style over the course of her career, hasn't she? So where does this kind of sit within her oeuvre and kind of the different styles that she's taken over the years?
I think this is there's probably an element. I'm sure there is an element of some youthful idealism. Some of her later work on the pressure on women in society really comes through very strongly, even violently, and that is and in terms of multi-generational violence as well. That's another theme in some of her other works. So I think that valences of things has changed, but stylistically, I think she does. It's sitting in front of me. It says psychological realism. I do think that is very astute as a representation of how she writes, and there's a line in the book about there's some people who can make simple things out of complicated situations, and some people who can make complicated things out of simple situations. And I think as an author, she's the latter.
Yeah. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, because you run the department that looks at all of this sort of thing. But to me, I always feel like Chinese authors are able to jump around a little bit more in terms of writing style, in terms of genre. You know, publishers never want you to do that here, right? If you set off writing in a certain style and you've done okay, they want you to continue writing in that style. And I think is that because we don't have that kind of state support level for writers? Is it just the way the publishing industry thinks? I mean, to go back to Feng Feng again, who's being translated, the two books that have just been translated by her are very different. Yet they represent, an earlier period of her career, but only 4 or 5 years between them, but quite different in style. And some of Tai Ning's later stuff is quite different in style. And yet Chinese writers seem to be able to do this, but don't maintain sort of loyal readerships.
It's a very different incentive system, I think, and one thing that I do know Tie Ning has been able to do in her very highly placed roles is to make more opportunities for ethnic minority writers, for additional women writers, and I think that you're very right that sometimes there's a little bit more stylistic fluidity within an author's writing when they're publishing in Chinese, whereas in publishing in English, you kind of have 2 books to establish yourself, and then either you can continue or you can't, and you continue kind of doing the same thing. Not across the board. There's certainly many exceptions to that, and I don't mean to make that sound too dire, but I think there is, but I mean, obviously R.F. Kuang is a major exception to this.
Yeah.
There are exceptions.
Yeah, and Tai Ning has won just about every big award you can win in China, right? The Laoshi, the Lushan. I mean, it doesn't get bigger than that. And she was also chairperson of the China Writers Association, the first woman chairman of that. I mean, can you explain to us what that means in a sort of Chinese context to hold that position?
I don't know if I can quite explain what it means, but I know it comes with extraordinary responsibility, and an extraordinary ability to uplift writers who are coming up generationally.
It's perhaps edit your own literary journal. and promote
Yes.
bad poetry.
Yes.
If you like.
More bad poetry if that's what you like, yes.
Um, and where is her career at now? She's sort of 70 or so. Is she still writing? Is she still producing work? Yeah.
Still writing, still active, which is fantastic.
Excellent. So before we go to questions, I want to ask you a little bit about your department and your career, because that's kind of important as well. I mean, you are the head of, I mean, this sounds fantastic, and I don't know necessarily too many equivalents. Translation and interpreting director, academic director of translation and interpreting at New York University. Well, what does that mean? What does that?
We have one of our graduate students assistants here.
Congratulations.
She graduated. But I won't put her on the spot.
You just
So
did.
it's, I know. And it's, if you talk to translators up to a certain point generationally, since we've been talking about generations, the narrative tends to be, I fell into it. I knew multiple languages. Somebody asked me to translate something. Next thing I knew, I was in books a year. But increasingly, there are younger people who have the drive and the desire to become translators. And they know it's what they want to do, and they're looking for preparation and training that is meaningful to set them up for that pathway. So I've been very privileged to work with an academic program. It's cross languages, so it's not just Chinese, although we have a fairly significant number of students in Chinese. But all of them exclusively self-selective. They want to be translators, and to know how to do it well. So it's just profoundly exciting work.
You know, translation. So translation here is as Daniel can explain at Sinoist, it is filling out a lot of forms for grants for support for what you do. It is not you know, particularly remunerative. It's a tough business. It's arguably getting tougher as academic spending is cut back, as grant institutions are cut back. And well, that's the situation here. What's do you feel is the situation in America? Are we likely to see more translations or less translations?
It's a significant challenge in the program that I work with at NYU. We do train in technical field translation as well. So if a student is interested, they can do a sideline in fiction translation while doing legal or financial or medical, which all of these are actually quite well paying. And so we try and give them a balance that way. In terms of grant funding is drying up, but there are a lot of good people and good organizations who are stepping forward to cover some of that gap.
And I don't know what it's like in the United States, but when you walk into a bookshop in the UK, obviously not this bookshop, Translations, you will see quite a lot of literature in translation, and you'll see quite a lot of East Asian literature in translation, and it will overwhelmingly at the moment be Japanese and Korean. Endless stories about people who run cafes with cats, all night restaurants with taxi drivers that go into them, and of course everything that's coming out of Korea and anime and everything else. And Chinese is almost kind of, you know, it's a tougher sell than it used to be. I mean, are you having the same issue in the United States?
I think there is that challenge as well in the United States. I think the organizations like Sinoist that are devoted to a diversity of voices are really important. There's still groups like Paper Republic. I'm naming UK-based organizations, but you know, very much about discovering new voices, new generations, exploring across genres as well. Have been really formative just in discovering new authors to translate. And I certainly hope there'll be a breakthrough soon.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is, as a last question to you, I mean, my sense is, thanks to Sinoist and other publishers around, there is actually more Chinese fiction in translation at the moment than there has been for an awfully long time. But trying to convince people to buy it is actually a bit tougher than it's been for quite a long time.
I think that's true, and there's starting to be some, you know, Jeremy Tiang is a great example of just people will pick up anything just because he translated.
And he's prolific.
Yeah, and he's prolific. So I think some figures like that are starting to move the needle a little bit.
Okay, let's get some questions from the audience. Do we have a roving microphone or anything? No? Do you want this one? Because I'm quite loud. Yeah, that's okay. Okay,
Any questions?
there was a lady over here that was waving at me. I don't know.
Okay.
There's a lady there, gentleman here.
Oh, go you.
Okay, thank you very much. Fascinating. My question is, I hope, to be taken as a neutral one, which is how, because talk about how important was it for a woman to translate this book? Because I mean, I translate, in fact, I don't think I've translated anything by a woman, any translation by a woman. That's the how it happened. But should I be nervous if this came along? There are problems. Sorry, my question sent getting very long, but in quite apart from, I don't know. I don't never had a sister. I have brother. I have a brother, but the dynamics of the relationships are fundamentally different, I suspect. So, and apart from that, how do you capture the unique Chineseness of that kind of thing? Because it's a very different setup. In China, the relationships between men and women, the way men express themselves, seems to be very different in China.
I think it's a wonderful question. I don't have a definitive answer. I do think that there are some experiences where, for example, I haven't translated that I know of a non-binary author, for example, and that might be something where it would be a lot of extra research sensitivity reads involving people from across the community. But I think in terms of whether we can try to make an effort when we're already trying to go across the language, we're trying to go across culture, these suspensions of disbelief, these imaginative leaps, they either work or they don't. Maybe it's all failure. Maybe all of our translation is failure. And that's one possibility. But to have literature that crosses boundaries and borders, we have to be able to make some of those imaginative transpositions, even if they're only temporary.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. But I couldn't see myself translating this and capturing the relationships in the way you do. Maybe that's simply stylistic in my part, but I have a feeling, just because I don't have the layers of understanding. My wife's relationship with her sister, whatever, and I suppose a lot of translation is observation. But I suspect at this point there's a level of personal experience perhaps.
Personal experience, but I also think I was asked earlier about advice for younger or emerging translators, and I think just constant reading and intake of literary info in all of your languages is really read anything and everything and absorb all of it. It's just part of the practice as a translator, I think.
Lady over here.
I have lots of impressions from you. 一等铁林的原作是没有纽扣的期刊 and if it's in direct translation, should it be buttonless, the red shirt, or the red shirt without buttons? I thought that is the highlights. So why did you miss out that? The second question is, if she has got so many books, why did you choose this one?
Yeah, those are both wonderful questions. So the buttonless red shirt was, I believe, the title when we applied to English Pen. And it was very much a wonderful collaborative, engaged discussion with the publisher again. And they came back and said, my sister's red shirt. And I will be honest, I think it's brilliant in English. I'm sorry I disagree. I think it really resonates in English in a way that the original really resonated well in Chinese.
I don't know. I'm surprised.
Yeah. Again, there's that surprise inside of the front jacket. He's disappointed. So, and then, I know that the author, was really excited about having this foundational work here in the.
We have a lady over there who earlier on gave me a question because she's some voice problems right now, so she's asked me to read out this question for her. And this is Jin there, and it's a groundbreaking work there. It's a groundbreaking work for telling China's reform and not only in the sense of the opening country's doors to the world, but also as a symbol of young Chinese women's awakening of thought and self-awareness. However, that was 40 years ago. In the decades since, China has undergone earth-shattering changes. Why then choose to translate such a relatively dated story?
I love it, very provocative. So I think, it's wonderful to remind people of the effect that this story had 40 years ago. I also think it's really timely today in English in a way that, now English readerships are incredibly diverse and pluralized and global, but they are, I think if this novella had been translated maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, it could have been read with a little bit of like looking down your nose at it, like, look at that, right? And I think now it's like, oh, there's a sense of recognition to what's going on in this cultural debate. And so I think that's why it's important now.
Anyone else have a question on the translation, on the book?
I have a more technical question, but were putting their patients. So what's possible? What's the decision-making process there to? Because I'm assuming that they relate to something that's specific information. So now we want to know the decision-making process there to use what they're saying, and then also we want to know if there was a decision-making process. But I know sometimes folks use Romanized versions of words in other languages and use a footnote to explain what the exactly is. So I just wanted to ask what the decision-making process is there for concerning.
I love that, very technical. So in terms of romanization of pinyin terms, so terms that are transliterated from Chinese, how they're treated in translation, I've tended to be in favor of the movement towards using them less and instead integrating the words into English and providing sort of subtle in-text glosses that explain, if necessary, if it's even necessary, any of the supporting meanings. I'm trying to think of specific examples of quotation marks as they might have been used. And I can't think of a specific example, so I'll get back to you unless you have one handy in the book right now. Yes.
It kind of started, I think, when they're walking. I don't know the person's name.
So there it's quoting the things that the younger sister is making fun of all the people by giving them silly nicknames. So that's why they're in quotation marks, because it's the younger sister calling them like a funny thing that has to do with how they look or how they're acting.
I just want to say, if you don't have a question, I want to say. The first time when I read the story, it's a teenager. And today, if I tell you I remember the story of the book, that's a lie. But, but I will read the English version. Maybe after I will read the Chinese again. That's all I want to tell you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Already because a lot of stories from, a lot of memories from the top. Thank you.
That's wonderful.
There's a lady over here. No? Oh, one here, sorry.
Question actually asked them earlier, which the themes we made about visibility of the literature in Chinese in particular, in fact, what we have readily visible from other cultures, even station and Korean. I was just wondering whether Annelise did sort and also Paul, then obviously was supposed to be many thousands in the month of that as well. Why lack of visibility in comparison with other cultures in Asia. I mean, about that. Thank you.
Would you like to speak to it first?
Well, I don't know, but I wonder about it all the time whenever I walk in a bookshop. And obviously, you're trying to I try to push translations quite a lot on social media and so on. I mean, Jeremy's work and other people's work and Paper Republic's work. I think it's certainly true that what people are seeing in the wider culture at the moment is certainly, a lot from Japan and Korea. I mean, if you're a younger reader and you're seeing what's on Netflix, what's on Amazon Prime and so on, there is a lot of Japanese and Korean content. I think there's this, I forget what the percentage was now, but particularly with younger generations, the obsessions with graphic art, novels and anime and manga and versions of that is a big trade, and China hasn't quite got itself into that world yet. I mean, we just had that movie recently, the cartoon movie that was really big and the box office thing, but it hasn't really been on the cinema here in the UK or on the streaming services yet. So I think China's a little bit behind on those trends, so it's not quite getting there. It's undeniable that in the last 2 years, everybody I know seems to have been to Japan 3 times. I mean, everybody's going there on holiday, right? So there's a desire there. Korea is interesting people as well. We know from what comes back from the university courses as well that the number of people here anyway that want to do Korean and Japanese is pretty much up. The number of people who want to do Chinese is at best flat, if not down. So the language itself is those languages themselves are attracting people more. So there's a job to do to win people over. I know that I talk to people in publishing and they say that there's also a generation coming through that wants to read things that don't make the world look a particularly ugly, horrible place at a moment when the world is a particularly ugly and horrible place, right? And a lot of the Japanese writing particularly does that. Whereas a lot of the Chinese writing that's coming out is fantastic, but it does challenge us. I just read one translation, Jack Hargreaves' translation, that's coming out later this year of a book that has been a bestseller in China about, delivery guy and the life that those guys live. You look at Jeremy Tiang and Eric Abrahamson recently translated, I forget the name of the author, I really like his work, about the motorbike guys that live on the outskirts of Beijing sprawl, it's called in English. Really great writing, but not feel good writing in a sense. And I think there's some people that want feel good writing at the moment. So it's just that broader publishing trends, as well as the specifics of the success of Japanese and Korean, really heavily state-sponsored culture as well. I heard on the radio the other day, they have a minister for manga in Japan, like a guy whose job is senior politician whose job is to just push manga, whether it's film, cartoon books, graphic novels, whatever, out to the world. Well, certainly don't have that in our current cabinet in Westminster, and America doesn't have that, and I don't think China really has that as well. That pushing out culture in that really direct way as an economic. This is what it makes us as well.
I would just add briefly that it may be a question of genre too, in that with Japanese you have manga, and then for Chinese, internet fiction is really fantastic, but it is hard to sell to a publisher in English at those lengths. It's hard. This is a lovely novella. The book I did after it, 582 pages, very hard to get a publisher to do a book of that length, and that's nothing compared to a lot of serial internet fiction.
Yeah. Do we have one more question? There's a lady there. Look, she's yeah, well done.
It's remind us, we appreciate probably we are not go through that time. The 1980s, we are teenagers. We're probably the best generation in the translation. Thank you so much.
I think that's probably a wonderful place to.
I think that's great. Go on, well.
We're practicing. Yeah, that's why we have even 40 years, 30 years, we go through all this.
Yeah. The billionaires. Yeah. Life was so simple. Nostalgia. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Annelise. We know you've got to get a train up to Edinburgh, so we're going to be fairly swift because you may want to sign some books as well and maybe ask a few more questions. This really is a lovely book. I must say, sinoists don't really shout about themselves enough. Even Daniel, believe it or not, does not shout about himself enough. If there's an award for a publisher in the UK that's doing the best covers and the best productions at the moment, it's absolutely fantastic what they're doing. And the hours spent filling in grant forms, having to deal with translators, not always easy, sorry, Annelise. And getting the books out there and hustling it around every bookshop that you can possibly do. Sinoists really deserve awards for that. And so well done. And this one is available. Please do buy it, and then you'll find out what the little secret is inside the cover. It's a great novel. It looks absolutely beautiful on your shelf. The translator is here. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the Battersea Bookshop. Thank you to Ying, Daniel, the team at Sinoist. Thank you, Annelise, for coming over and spending some time in London on your trip. And thank you all for coming out tonight to support Chinese literature and translation. Thank you, David.
Thank you very, very much for being with us this evening. And just a couple of more housekeeping things. Annelise do have a train to run, train to get to at 8, I believe, King's Cross. Yeah, so we do need to be rather nippy about this. But Baxi has very generously offered a 15% discount off the book tonight. So if you're willing to part with some hard-earned cash, we have the translator right here. Yeah, it's a little sweetener. And then the other thing is that if I was going to remind everyone on the Art Council questionnaire, if at all possible, we'll circulate this also as a link after the event. If you can fill that questionnaire out, that'd be fantastic and help with quite a fair bit. And if you enjoyed this event today, we do have another event coming shortly at 19th, again, in Veranda's with Annelise, and also featuring Nikki Harmon and Georgia Deschamps. And in October, we'll have an author called Yao Limei coming over to the UK from Shanghai. She published a book by her called The Unfilial last year. Pink, gorgeous pink cover. It did quite well for us. We're very looking much forward to that. And again, just echoing on what Paul said, thank you so much for both Paul and Annelise for being with us. And thank you again to Battersea Bookshop. And we hope you have a pleasant evening. Thank you.